to the EMS world, the aesthetic of EMS.
两只然后合在一起，
Yeah, I think it is not a big problem. Okay, Dr. Robin? Okay.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've never played the Las Vegas ballroom, so I'm not sure how good I'm going to be at walking around. My pointer will work, but my eyes can't see from the back. So if you don't mind, I'm going to stand up here. I'd like to say next. I get confused, two hands. The last time I talked in Malaysia was 4 years ago. In fact, the last time I talked in Malaysia, I uttered the word EMS. I'm sorry I ever uttered it. I guess because it's mostly English speaking here, it got picked up. And EMS became the term used around the world when in fact we should have been using APIS. And I honestly haven't had much to say for 4 years. We really have undergone a period of a loss of confidence. Now, 4 years ago, I was too confident. I talked about sustainability. I talked about how we had this thing whipped. And then this EMS thing came along. I lost my confidence. And certainly from the South, we used the term mojo. My mojo was gone. But today, I think I'm getting the mojo back. I think in Thailand we're getting the mojo back. CP is getting the mojo back. So I kind of want to go through our story of how we got the mojo back and what it means to you. Because if Thailand can get the mojo back, so can Malaysia. So I had a title of a talk a couple of weeks ago, and it was Understanding EMS, Can It Be Stopped? And then last week, someone told me I had to change it for today. So I came up with a new title, Successful Shrimp Farming in an EMS World. Yes, the EMS world is getting larger and larger. There used to be just 4 members of the club. Now, unofficially, I think there's at least 15 or 20 members of the club. So we really are in an EMS world today. Next. So I always started the talk with the conclusion. And this was in the talk a couple of weeks ago where it's, can it be stopped? Well, yes, it can. I took a trip to southern Thailand maybe in May of this year, and I saw one successful harvest after another. Farmers were telling me they were making more money than they did in 2010. There was a lot of success, and this just shows one of our customers, but there's others that aren't our customers, but our customers are doing well. Nice large shrimp, very profitable crops. Next. Next. And then 2 weeks ago, I took a leading Ecuadorian farmer to visit some of our farms, and he witnessed this harvest, a 54-gram shrimp, 105 days, 22 tons per hectare. That farmer's eyes are still on that farm. He could not believe it. 54 grams coming out of a production pond. You know, in Ecuador, he said he had never seen a 54-gram shrimp. Next. And then last week, I took another little group from DSM. We had a little meeting with DSM last week. I took them around. Another harvest, 30 tons, 1 hectare pond, 115 days, 54 grams. These are not unusual anymore. We've got our mojo back. How did we do it? Next. I think I always start from a historical perspective. History repeats. It repeats in different ways, but it does repeat. So I plotted out Malaysia. Now, the numbers may be different, but the trend is the same. We started out in 2001 at under 30,000 tons. Then Vanami comes in, and we peaked around 90,000 tons. And then we've been in a slide since then. If we remember here, what happened? Why did we go from here to here? We had to change. We had to learn, and we had to change. Next. So let's look at the deja vu. 2001, I'm going to show Thailand slides, maybe similar in Malaysia, but I'm going to do Thailand. This is what I came back to in Thailand in 2001, a failed monodon industry. It was going nowhere. Next. So we were sourcing wild broodstock, and clearly from my experience from the Americas and other places, the problem was that, the broodstock, the wild animals, the non-domesticated stock. So we changed. 2002, Thailand changed. We moved to nuclear breeding. We established several nuclear breeding facilities to produce disease-free, healthy broodstock. We then learned biosecurity against our number one enemy then, white spot. So we put in biosecurity. And we learned with healthy shrimp, white shrimp, all of a sudden the biomasses got too big for our aeration. So we had to add more aeration. We learned and we changed and we created success. Next. So, to have success, I have one rule. It's got to be simple. Complexity doesn't work. If we want whole industries to change, it has to be simple. It has to be straightforward. And it has to be cost effective. This is what I left in Guatemala when I left the Americas. Poor quality seed, different sizes, full of all kind of unknown evil things. And so we bring in SPF to Thailand. 2004. This is a 15-day-old animal in the pond. Good success, but that wasn't enough. We started selecting, and today, at 15 days, they look like this. So we still have healthy shrimp that now grow fast, and that fast growth is basically key to keeping your cost low. But they have to live. If they die, who cares? Next. So again, I didn't read the little bottom there, but to get them to live just like they did in 2002, you need biosecurity. Our SPF animals in 2002 would die of white spot. But in Asia, we concentrate on small controlled ponds with biosecurity. So let's go through a process, because everybody says biosecurity. Nobody understands biosecurity. I've always said to have biosecurity, you have to know your enemy. We knew white spot, but we didn't know aphids and we don't know EHP. Know your enemy, and then you can create biosecurity. So, the enemy. If it dies, that's aphids. If it dies with birds, meaning they get sick, that's white spot. And if we have slow growth and high size variation, that's EHP. I learned an interesting term at the DSM meeting. It was called symptomic surveillance. So that's what I do. If I go to a farm and it's that, aphids, white spot, and microsporidium, I look at the picture and I have my diagnosis. Next. And then we need to understand. So, to create effective biosecurity, I have to understand aphids, I have to understand EHP, and I need to understand white spot. This for me is EMS. 3 diseases. Yeah, I know they don't all die early, but for me, today's issues are 3. You have to have all of them. And then we need to select genetic stocks of shrimp for the 3. And that takes some time, but it can be done. Next. So, the 3 new rules of biosecurity in the new age of EMS. Now, there's a lot of solutions, and I'm not smart enough to come up with the best ones. So, I come up with general principles, and I let you come up with the best solutions. You just have to make sure you follow the principles. White spot. Okay, we know the white spot routine. Biosecurity for white spot, you got the birds, you got the water, you got clean PLs, you got to keep the crabs out, We all know that one. Aphids. It's not about exclusion of the bacteria. You can't. Don't even try. It's about reducing the bacterial food and the substrates to keep the bacterial level low. And then EHP. Biosecurity rule for EHP, clean broodstock, clean PLs, clean farm, and clean water source. I call it the 4 C's. If you got those, you don't have EHP. Next. So, we always start with clean, healthy, SPF post-larva. This is no. Okay, if your HP tubules look like this, you've got a problem that you don't want to be stocking because this type of animal is going to be sensitive to disease. This is, yes, healthy, active, low CV, low size variation, healthy HP tubules. Always start with a healthy PL. Next. Okay, I'm not going to go through the white spot exclusion, biosecurity. We all know this. I think I first showed this one in 2003. So, we know this one. Next. But we need to understand aphids so we understand why we create the biosecurity that we do. We must have threshold numbers of bacteria because of this thing called quorum sensing. You have a few bacteria that matter. They don't produce toxin. We need a certain number of bacteria to hit a threshold to produce toxin. Then we need to understand aphids bacteria grow and produce toxin on the following. Shrimp feed. If your shrimp food is in the pond too long, that's going to become a very high level of aphids and it will kill shrimp. Shrimp shells, molts. Aphids loves molts. They love chitin. And shrimp like to eat molts. That's a problem. And shrimp sludge. Basically, that's partially digested shrimp feed. So yes, aphids likes that too. And the problem with Van Amme likes all of this. They'll eat old feed. They will eat sludge. They will eat molts. Van Amme is a non-discriminatory eater. So it eats the toxin. And then finally, shrimp must ingest the toxin from the environment. If they don't ingest toxin, they don't die. So, that's really all we need to know today for aphids. With that, you can go out and create some wonderful management. Next, understanding EHP. EHP is a parasite, kind of like a virus, you need the host, but in this case, it's a fungus. So we kind of know that. Exclusion is kind of important here. It's like a virus. And EHP survives as a spore outside of a host for a very long time and is difficult to disinfect. That makes it more difficult than a virus. If a white spot viron is outside of the host, it's gone in 3 days. If an EHP spore is outside of the host, it stays around a long time. So, as it requires a host, and the only host we know at this time is another shrimp, exclusionary principles will apply. Clean broodstock, clean PLs, clean ponds, and then clean water that you use on the farm or the hatchery. All right, next. So, now usually I do the EHP last, but they say EHP is more important, and when I get to the end, I run out of time, so we never do EHP. So today I'm going to do EHP, and if we run out of time, we won't do aphids. And I won't even attempt to say this. EHP. I used to say EH, but then George says it has to be EHP to rhyme with EMS. Okay? So we'll call it EHP. I can deal with that. And you can see it under a wet squash in the HP. This is under basically 100x oil immersion. If you have really good eyes and you've learned what to look for, you can squash it and see the EHP spores in a wet mount. Next. Now, we've had microsporidium before. Usually we called it cotton shrimp, and it required an intermediary host. It required a carnivorous fish. So this microsporidium is different. It doesn't require an intermediary host that we know of. It has a much higher prevalence. Usually we'll only find this at 3 or 4% in a pond, whereas EHP will have almost 100% prevalence. And this is in the muscle tissue, and EHP is in the HP tissue. Next. Characteristics of EHP. For me, this is as good as any PCR. When an Asian shrimp starts growing slow to less than 0.15, I will almost be 95% sure we have EHP if it's an Asian population of shrimp. We will usually see if it's a higher density, we'll see a spread in size uniformity. And if it gets really serious, and we're measuring with our fine real-time PCR, we get above 10.6, 10.7, we'll sometimes see loose shells. Okay, next. Detection can be difficult, and this is the reason that EHP is the problem it is today. It spreads through the rootstock, it spreads through the PLs, and detection is difficult. You really need a real-time PCR to get down levels that are important for carriers. If we use your normal PCR, you need above 10 to the 3 micrograms of DNA. Okay, that's almost a symptomatic stage. It's at a disease. But there's a lot of shrimp out there that are non-symptomatic, that are carriers, that are below 10 to the 3. So your PCR shows a negative when in fact they're positive. Now if I'm using real time, I can get down below 10 to the 1. All right, that's better, but it's not perfect. If we're using histology, I can tell you, I have sent samples to the best pathologists in the world, and they missed it. They missed it more than once. Because under HE stain, you can't see it. Very difficult. Now, if we use in situ hybridization, it lights up. But under normal histological conditions, unless the pathologist really is looking for it, he will miss it. So we're missing it with PCR, we're missing it with histology. And now we're sending broodstock everywhere. Next. Spore destruction is difficult. Not impossible. Please, journalists, take note, not impossible. I got in trouble because it came across as it's impossible. It's only difficult. If you don't find destruction with defecation or sun drying. There are reports of microsporidium spores lasting 50 to 60 years in a dry state. Probably not good for farm management. I know from experience that chlorine at 200 ppm is not necessarily effective. I know from experience that ozone is not necessarily effective. There is some confusion about freezing. Some people tell me freezing yes, some people tell me freezing no. It may be we just haven't defined freezing well enough yet. And if this meeting was maybe a week from now, I would answer the question. Next. So, what are some of the outward signs? Well, one of the confusing things is what we're calling this white sheet, these white things. A lot of people think that that's symptomatic of this. I used to think that. I'm not so sure anymore because I see shrimp now all over the world with white things, and I don't think they have EHP. But certainly when you do have EHP, these white sheets are very common. Next. And you can see it in PLs. In fact, this thing will infect in the hatchery in PLs. It can get very badly infected in the hatchery if you got a bad infection. And then you can also see the little white things in infected PLs. That's a pretty good scientific term, little white thing. Don't quote me. Okay? Next. And then white feces. Is that or is that not microsporidium? All right. Again, we have some divergence of opinion. My opinion is it is. Others, it is not. I have my opinion because I've never seen white feces that did not test positive for EHP. Now, I have seen EHP not produce white feces, but I'll tell you one story. I had an intensive tank, lots and lots of shrimp. They were wide size variation, growing slow. They had EHP, no white feces. Then I had a biofilter failure. I had a spike of nitrite. The next day I had white feces. And we know white feces are associated with bad bottoms. So I think when you have EHP and a bad bottom, you have the conditions to create a super condition of white feces. Opinion, no scientific evidence. Observational. Next. And the other thing that I first noticed, now EHP is not new. Okay, we first saw EHP in Thailand in 2009. And it took us really about until 2010-11 to figure it out enough that we cut it off. So today, you find some EHP in Thailand, but not very much. Now, one of the things I noticed when we started seeing HP, actually I didn't, David Garrigas that works for me did, he saw these worms in the HP that he had never seen before. And they looked like gregarines. Oh, we showed all these to again, the famous pathologists. Some of them immediately were astute enough to say, there's no nuclei, it can't be a gregarine. Others would just say, well, we can't see the nuclei, it must be. So we actually took money and you can pick these worms out of the HP. So you can pick a tube full of these things. And we sent it off for genomic analysis, and it came back shrimp. Did that 3 times before we were convinced it really was the shrimp and not some foreign body. I do believe that when you see this, there are or there's the microsporidium involved in the production of these tubules within the HP. So that is one indicator I look for. If I have this in an HP, I'm pretty sure I have microsporidium. Next. EHP directly affects horizontal vertical transmission. Okay, in the hatchery, if your brood animal is infected, it basically will infect the nuclei we always have that fecal to nuclei transmission. It is a fecal to nuclei transmission, so we can infect to the nuclei, then go to the PL, and then go to your farm. Or if you're in the farm, and somehow we just get 1 or 2 infected individuals, we can get horizontal transmission through the water. So actually in an experimental condition, I can take an aquarium, I can half it, I can put infected animals here, clean animals here, and in 4 or 5 days, the clean animals are infected through waterborne transmission. It can transmit through spores in a pond. Now this is another rule that I have. If your pond has been infected, it's infected forever until you do something. The spores are in your pond, likewise in your hatchery. Wherever this thing goes, you can be sure they've left a present in the form of spores. And unless you take action to destroy the spores, it will be a continuing, if not accelerating problem. Next. Carriers of microsporidiums, well, again, pond-reared broodstock. It's not nuclear breeding. They're exposed. They can carry it. Broodstock feeds. We've seen it in polychaetes, in bivalves. Now, this is passive, okay? Passive means these things are in infected areas, picking it up, and it's passing through their intestinal tract. But it can still infect. Nuclei, infected maturation. PLs from infected nuclei, pond reservoir bottoms. I made this mistake before. I had a problem on a farm. I disinfected the whole farm, and the next cycle I had the problem again. I missed the reservoir. It's in the reservoirs too. You got to disinfect everything. And source water. When you get a neighborhood where everybody's got the disease and everybody's passing the spores into the local water, yeah, it's there too. And now it's going to come back and bite you again. Next. To prevent EHP, we must be clean. Now, this may be pretty simple, but sometimes it may be difficult because in a lot of cases, this requires cooperation. Everybody needs to be clean, otherwise the environment gets dirty. We have to start with the clean broodstock, then go to the clean PLs, then go to the clean farm that has clean water. The whole line of possession has to be clean. Okay, next. To disinfect. Okay, I said it was difficult. It's not impossible. There's ways of disinfecting anything that you come up with. Now, in this case, we're looking at pH because the microsporidium is a chitin wall. Fungus have chitin, and chitin dissolves at high pH. So we can actually dissolve the chitin spore wall, and that destroys it. So here we basically add calcium oxide, which can get your pH very high. Now I must add caution. When you use calcium oxide, this is the same chemical the mafia uses to get rid of evidence. They basically dissolve bodies in this. So you need to make sure your workers understand that if they dip their hand in the calcium oxide, it'll come out a bone. Must be careful. You plow it into the sediment, and then you have to moisten it. We need the reaction. So you need to react it. Get the pH above 12, and then within 1 week that pH is going to correct again. It's going to come down to levels that you can stop, but without the spores. Next. Now another thing that we learned, or I learned maybe 3 or 4 years ago on a farm I had, that we always wondered why. Okay, here, this is complicated, and probably if I did this again, I probably should do it easier so that even I can understand it. But this is a non-infected PL. So this is one farm. Some ponds got infected PLs, some ponds got non-infected PLs. So the non-infected has a normal growth curve. The ones that are infected basically had a normal growth curve to 30 days. And then it slows down. So it's normal to 30 days before it goes. Now why is that? So we set up a program with a real-time PCR to look at DNA amount, which is proportionate to spores, to see if there is a relationship with the concentration of the spore in the HP and its effect on growth or health of the shrimp. And basically we found that below 10 to the 4 levels, there's no effect. There's no disease below 10 to the 4. But as the days go on in the pond, the spore numbers increase, and when the spore numbers increase above 10 to the 4, it starts growing slow. And then if you happen to keep that animal in the pond in 90 days, you'll oftentimes reach 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 8 DNA units. Now at that point, you can actually see some chronic mortality. But most people don't keep it till 90 days. So generally we don't see chronic mortality, we just see slow growth and increasing size variation. Next. Now this is an EMS environment. You don't get one disease or the other. You get both. Most shrimp today we can find Apin's DNA in the stomach, and we can find spores. So it's not, oh, I'm going to have this disease or that disease. They're all mixed in. And also, there's probably some white spot. I just didn't measure that. We're in an EMS environment. Now, the combination of this is kind of interesting. I really don't have anything definitive today, but I think from an observational point of view, it asks some interesting questions. Before EHP got spread all over China, all over Vietnam, all over India, forget India, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, EMS, Apin's killed. Now there seems to be a switch to a bigger problem of EHP. But we don't see the early mortality any longer. It's just slow growth. Is there an interesting interaction here? Question to ponder. Next. Are we falling asleep? Haven't started Apin check, you know. Now another observation, and again these observations I made in India, I made in Vietnam, and I made in Thailand, is that if this no infection, my shrimp is going to grow to 28 grams, but as my salinity increases from 0, I get almost no reduction in growth at low salinities. But as they increase, I get a higher effect of the microsporidium. So when I'm in India, even if they're stocking low density at 40 or 50 parts per thousand, very high impact. But if I'm in Thailand and they're stocking 60 and they're at 0, I see almost no impact. So this needs to be confirmed through experimentation. Same way with density. Lower density, less impact. Higher density, higher impact. Next. Management. Okay, this is basically what we've just gone through. Start with clean animals. Then you disinfect your pond if you had the disease in there before. Your reservoir, you make sure you get rid of the spores. Now, if it were my farm, I'm not so sure of my own skill. So I'm going to lower my stocking density. So even if I have a few spores left, these animals are going to grow up to 25, 30, 35 grams, and I'll still get a profitable crop. And if I don't get an EHP, then the second crop I go back normal. But at least I hedge with a slightly lower stocking density. And then, again, if you have the option for lower salinity, it's certainly better than high salinity. All right, next. Do we have time to continue? Okay. Aphids. Understanding aphids. The first thing that I will say, and I understand that most people in Malaysia already understand this, aphids is not a vibriosis. It's not a systemic vibriosis. Now, how do I know that? Very simple. If I take a large amount of aphids bacteria and I heat kill it, and then I feed the heat killed bacteria to my shrimp, I still get aphids. The histology is there. The disease is there, even with a heat-killed bacteria. But if I take a heat-killed Harveyi and try to infect a shrimp, nothing happens. That's vibriosis. You need a live animal. This, you need a toxin. Whether it's dead or not, the toxin is there. This is a toxicosis. Next. So, a typical aphids challenge. This is, again, just verification of what I said. If I add the aphids here on day 2, so I get my shrimp acclimated a little bit, I add day 2, wow, rapid death. There's no sickness here. They're alive and dead. And this is the first thing I observed in China in 2009, where I said to myself, this is something different. I would go to ponds, and there would be no sick shrimp. There would be dead shrimp and healthy shrimp. So, very fast. Now, oftentimes you'll look at these challenges, and we'll start seeing dribbling mortality after that. That's from secondary bacterial infections. The survivors sometimes get stressed enough to pick up a secondary bacteria, and that creates the chronic phase. But it's not the primary toxin. That's within 12 hours. It dies. That's another thing that you will find. In a live shrimp, you will never find aphids systemically. You'll never find it in the HP. You'll never find it in the blood. You will only find it in the HP in the blood when that shrimp is next to dead or dead. Next. This is hopefully to illustrate the toxicosis. But essentially, it's like having a cockroach. Imagine this being your shrimp, and we spray the aphids toxin on it, and it's dead. Toxicosis. And in fact, the Peter toxin 1 and 2 are natural insecticides. It really is like spraying your shrimp or your cockroach and killing it. Next. Okay. Initially we called